Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the mentorDINO YouTube channel. This week, I am super excited to celebrate that I have shared 50 ARE stories. If you haven't been checking out my blog, I have been running an architecture registration exam story series, and this is all about individuals teaching their specific story on how they got through the registration exams. I first thought of this idea when I led a panel discussion within my firm and asking the three panelists how they got through the architecture exams. And I was amazed by how different their stories were and their different challenges were from each other as well as myself. I did go through ARE 4.0 and not 5.0 like they did, but you still hit the similar struggles and paths. You can get tired and exhausted, and then when you fail an exam, you're just depleted and you don't want to start studying again because you put your heart into it and then you ended up failing. So I decided to run the ARE series in terms of highlighting people getting through the process and showcasing that everyone is different. There is no correct path. Failing an exam is okay. It's part of the learning process, and provide hope and motivation for those going through the exams. And 50 stories later, I can't believe the stories I've been able to gather. I am absolutely humbled and happy that I had the 50 stories, and they are all so different. We have stories of people flying through the exams in a week. We have people that have just gone through the exams, passing all of them in the first try. But we also have people that failed a small handful. We've had people that fail a good amount of them. We have people that have failed over 10 exams. We've got individuals that had that one exam they couldn't pass, and that was the only one they kept failing, and it was a challenge along the way. We've shared stories of people taking breaks because life does get in the way. You never know when you're going to move or get laid off from your job or have a child. You never know what's going to get thrown at you. And thankfully, NCARB has changed their policy on the rolling clock. So if something in your life does happen, you don't have a restriction of completing all the exams within 5 years. You won't lose your past exam on your credentials. So I just want to take a moment to celebrate where we are, celebrate these great people that have gone through and shared their stories with us, just highlighting them again, sharing their story. And you can always check out the full blog post article down below, where it will give you quick links and access to every person's full story. But these little you can check out the full blog post article below, where I give some highlights and quick tips on where to be able to find all of these stories. And it also gives the highlighted quote. So with each story, I go through and ask them for an introduction about themselves, so you can learn more about them or their trials and tribulations. They go through their exam order, so it goes through what date that they took the exam, if they took it in person or virtual, what exam it was, and if they passed or failed. So then you can see what sort of order people are taking exams if you don't necessarily want to follow the NCARB recommended order. They also give helpful advice along the way. Some of these stories really go through and tell you when they were exhausted and they needed to take a break, or when they learned that they really shouldn't take an exam right around the holidays. And I go on to ask them open-ended questions at the bottom. So at the bottom of each blog post, they have an opportunity to answer one of 5 questions. I usually ask them to answer at least 2, just so you have something to look at. The first one is why they wanted to become an architect. And some of the stories and quotes that they have as an example of being an architect goes beyond just saying, I am an architect. Some of them is really going into what their dreams and aspirations were, or they want to own a firm someday, and really trying to leverage that and use the licensure to their full advantage. The second question I ask is, where did they even start? Because it can be very overwhelming to understand where to even start your exam process, where you want to go, what study materials do you need? Did they have a buddy along the way? Was their motivation pushing them? Or did they take a little bit of a break and get some experience first before they take their exams? There's no right or wrong answer. The third question I do go into what resources best helped them. And I have another one that is, how did they fit this into their schedule? So both of these types of questions are meant to help you in terms of folding in how you want to approach the exams, because everybody studies a little bit differently. They have their own different style. So you can take a look at these two questions and see what resources were helpful for others, get their feedback on those resources, and you can always jump in and take a look. I also have a full resource guide on my website, which I'll leave a link in the show notes below, so you can jump on, and I organize all the resources, free and paid, based on exam or bundles, and give you links to those as well. And then all about the timing and getting things to fit, it does take a commitment. There is a theme with these 50 stories that it does go through and say it is a time commitment, that you have to be ready to go for the exams and understand that it will take time and it is hard work and dedication to get through them. And so this question's meant to, so you can see how they squeezed it in. Did they fit it in during their lunch break? Are they a morning person where it was better for them to get up early in the morning? Do they commute on public transit so they find audiobooks and things that they can listen to a little bit more attainable to squeeze in study time? If they had kids, how did they manage that process and really leaning on their partner to help them through to be able to leverage that? Or if they even had a buddy, a lot of the times you can have an accountability buddy to keep you on track. And it doesn't have to be somebody studying for the AREs. There are spouses that their spouse is now a lawyer and they were studying for their boards. And so use that time to leverage that study mode and have a study buddy to be able to schedule that with. A lot like having a workout buddy to go to the gym with. You may not necessarily be doing the same workout, but they're ones to get you going and get you to the gym if you need that motivation. And then the final question I ask is, what open advice do you have for somebody studying the AREs? And some of the advice I've gotten is truly inspirational to be able to go through and get ready to take your architecture exams, and advice to take into your architecture career in general. So I hope you have time to go through the ARE stories and see everybody's individual experiences and be able to celebrate with me these 50 stories, because again, it's a celebration and I want to celebrate each of these 50 individuals that were able to share our stories so far. And now I want to go through some quick facts and numbers because I love data. So the data I've collected from these stories has helped give kind of a frame of reference. And so I want to give you the numbers I know from the first 50 stories. So out of the first 50 stories, I do not limit if somebody actually took ARE 4.0 versus 5.0 or was part of that transition, because there is a time that you could have taken some exams in 4.0 and transitioned to 5.0 and there was a cross. You cannot do that anymore, but I did not limit the stories of people who did that. So out of the stories I collected, 94% of the 50 took ARE 5.0 exams. 24% of them were actually part of the transition between ARE 4.0 and 5.0. Some of them never passed an exam in 4.0 and gave up on 4.0 and went straight to 5. One of the benefits of the transition was there's one less exam you had to take. If you could take specific ones of 4.0, then you only had to take 2 more of 5.0. So that was one of the leveraging purposes to why people really wanted to get through in that transition period. But I do have stories where people just couldn't get through and pass a 4.0 exam, so they decided to transition to 5.0 and be able to get into this slightly different exam type. And then 70% of the 94% only took 5.0 exams. So a good chunk of my stories are people that took solely the 5.0 exams, for any of you who are currently going through the exam process. Now, for most people, you will fail an exam. I know I failed 2 exams when I went through, and I know I felt like a failure. I felt like I didn't want to go any further, that I didn't prove myself as an architect, I'm not good enough, and it can really pause your studying and keep you going. where failure should actually be looked at as just a stepping stone to learning. Everybody has a different process that they go through, and they have a different learning style. And so it's about learning yourself to figure out how to tackle these exams, because they are not easy. And so don't let failing an exam hold you back. And let the exams, or people failed a bunch of them, be a motivation to you if you are struggling to get through these exams. And don't hesitate to reach out to those people on LinkedIn for any more additional advice. So out of the first 50 stories, the average number of failed exams was 2.84. So on average, people are failing at least 2 exams, sometimes 3. But 12% of the 50 failed more than 9 exams. And there's people everywhere in between. So understand, if you are failing exams and struggling to get through the process, maybe it's just reframing how you're going through the exams, and use these failed exams stories as idea generators. Is there a different type of study material you need? Is it something where you need to purchase something else? Do you need a different study group or team? There's some great resources out there depending on what your needs are to get through the exams. Out of the 50 stories, 30% of the 50 failed 0 exams. So 70% of the stories collected have failed at least once. And that's okay, because nowhere in a resume or job interview or going after a project, you just say, my name is Caitlin Rossier. I am an architect and I have 10 years of experience. Nowhere in that statement does it say how many times I failed the exam. It doesn't tell you when I got licensed and my process through that, but I'm able to say I am an architect. And that's all that matters. So don't let failing exams hold you back and think you are not a good enough architect. You'll get there, and you got this. If you're looking for any advice on where to start beyond what the NCARB examples give you in terms of the exam order, 42% of my 50 stories started with the practice management exam, or PCM is how most of us abbreviate it if you're used to the abbreviations. So if you're looking for something to start with, you're always welcome to start out with that. I will say there is a general theme throughout the stories that most people do follow the NCARB order. With ARE 4.0, which I took, there was a lot more variables that people were taking the exams in all sorts of different orders and had different reasonings for it. And when 5.0 restructured itself, it did lend itself to kind of working you through a project to the end. And when you come out of school and you just more know the schematics, you're starting to get into a little bit of the details, sometimes that's a little bit easier as something to start out with, because you don't typically jump right into construction administration whenever you start out your career. And now in terms of length of time, I know I completed my exams. Again, I had to take 7 exams and I failed 2 of them. And that was about a 2-year time span. And I was very rigid on top of my study schedule to make sure I got it done. Based on the averages of my 50 stories I collected, it is about on average 846 number of days from the first past exam to the last past exam. So it does take some time to work through it, but you can work through it faster and you can work through it slower. It is solely up to you, and it's your decision on what you want to do with that. 22% of my stories actually got it done in less than a year. And I do have a few people that got it done within a month or less. And usually those people had some other experience or solely blocked out their calendar, or they weren't working at the time. They had different scenarios that lended themselves the full opportunity to immerse themselves in the exams, and they didn't have other responsibilities along the way. 34% actually took over 3 years to get through. I didn't break it out more than that to go year by year. If you do want that breakout, let me know down below in the comments, and I'm more than happy to pull out that information for you to see all the different levels and where they are. But that's the pretty easy breakdown on 22% less than a year and 34% over a year, which leaves roughly 40 some percent in the middle, going from between a year to 3 years. So it does take time to get through the exams. Most people do recommend taking these exams as soon as you can when you start out of college. I usually recommend that for a few reasons. One, because you're still in a study routine. You already are in the process, you're used to studying at night, just keep it rolling as you start and getting through the process. Two, it does help with the learning curve. When you come out of architecture school, there's still a pretty big gap in what education teaches you and what you need to be able to do in the real world. So studying for the exams can help you learn things ahead of time before you see them in reality. And so it helps to boost up that learning curve and get you over that hump. Third is because you are a young professional within the office and you don't have as many responsibilities as you do as you gain experience in the firm. Soon as you become a lead on a project or even have people under you or you have a year of experience, you may be teaching people younger than you. And you may, if you're leading a project, need to delegate to others. I know sometimes I don't have time during the day to make my list for everybody that's on my teams on their tasks for the day. So sometimes I'm just brain dumping when I'm at home and after dinner, and it's easier for me to just write it down when I'm not getting phone calls. But when I was studying for the exams, that was my study time. So if I was constantly waiting until the end of the day, I may not have time to get it done because I was worried on putting together the drawing set and making sure everybody else on my team has things to do. And when you're a young professional, you're just receiving that delegated work. So you can leverage that knowledge that you don't have to figure out everything you need to do in the evening time or research other components. So those are some quick tips to why I would start studying for the exams right away. You don't need to, and it's fully up to you. But you can also check out if you need a monetary motivation. You can check out my Pittsburgh Equity and Architecture report that I put together. It's a free resource and it's all for the Pittsburgh area, but it's still generally relevant to anybody around the country. So you can have an understanding of cost differences. I do break out salaries and people who are unlicensed versus licensed, and you can see it's generally a 10 to 12K difference between somebody that's unlicensed and somebody that's licensed. And generally with the years of experience, you're doing the same thing. So why get paid less for just a little bit of work to get through there? So I hope you can help me celebrate these 50 stories I had. I hope they are motivation to you on getting through the exams. And since I started my YouTube channel right around the 50 mark, I'm going to make sure I celebrate the stories I share at the end of every month. So keep track on the YouTube channel and always head over to my website to check out the blog for new stories every week. I do post 2 ARE stories a week at this moment. So thank you guys for joining me on the channel, and subscribe below because it'll really help people find out about these stories and be able to get through the process, and really helps us keep this going. So thanks, guys.